Hello, everyone. I'm Pramit. I'm a final year PhD student in the Department of Engineering Science at the University of Oxford. And I would like to thank MICCAI Society and RISE-MICCAI board for inviting me for the talk today. So I'm going to be talking mostly about the research that we have been doing in the Oxford Biomedical Image Analysis cluster towards privacy preserving machine learning, particularly for medical image analysis or healthcare AI. So instead of just talking about one particular paper, I thought it'll be a nice idea to give you a brief overview of what we have been doing for the last 3-4 years around this topic of federated learning. And so I'll be talking mostly about our research, recent research on this area of federated learning. I'll first introduce what federated learning is. I'll show how federated learning can be useful to enable building machine learning models across different countries, so enabling international collaborations. So the real world implementation of federated learning. I'll be talking about some of the practical challenges that we face in federated learning for medical image analysis and how we are trying to tackle some of those problems. And then I'll talk about the context of federated learning in the era of foundation models, particularly focusing on parameter efficient fine tuning of foundation models in federated learning settings. Okay, let me first explain a little bit of what federated learning is for those of us who are new to this area. So federated learning is essentially a way of doing privacy preserving machine learning or decentralized machine learning, where we don't follow the regular route of collecting all the data together in one particular place or the server and then training our machine learning model on the accumulated data at a given device. Instead, what we do is we send our models to these edge devices or these clients. As you can see here, we have, let's say, 4 clients that we collect data from. But instead of collecting data and aggregating in a central location, we instead send our model to these different clients. The reason being the privacy and the data governance. So we are trying to move away from the idea of data sharing towards the idea of data access. So particularly in healthcare, we are faced with this challenge that none of the hospitals or the medical institutions or clinics want to share data with us, particularly because of the data governance issues and because we all know patient data is sensitive. So as a result of that, the way out, which was basically developed around 2017, was this idea of distributed or decentralized machine learning, where we have our model in the server. Let's say this is my server. This is the central location that is connected to all these client devices. And so what we do is we send our model to these different devices where the models are trained locally and individually in these different devices on the local data. And then after one round of training, for example, after one round of training, it's collected in the server. And then we aggregate the models in the server, and then we send the aggregated or the global model back to these different edge devices or the client devices. And so in this way, iteratively, round after round, we collect the models in the server, then send it back to the different clients, and we train locally, again, collect it, aggregate, and send it back. And in this way, round after round, the federated learning takes place. So that way we deal with the problem of data sharing, because now the client data never leaves the client devices. And so the patient privacy and data governance issues are addressed. So that was a brief idea about what federated learning is. Next, what I'll do is I'll show you some of our practical works, some of our real world implementations, particularly enabling international collaborations using this federated learning. We have this framework that is very useful for federated learning called Flower. So using this Flower framework for federated learning, we are trying to establish international collaborations. So let's see what problem we are solving. Now, the lab I come from, the Noble Lab in Oxford, is primarily a biomedical image analysis lab, and we focus on fetal ultrasound videos. And so the first project that we worked with was this fetal ultrasound video anatomy detection task, where we were trying to detect different anatomies of the fetus. And because we don't have enough data here, and also we want to generalize across different devices or across different countries and different populations. So we work with the Indian sites. So we have we have 2 clients in the UK side, and we have 2 clients in the Indian side. As you can see, I have the data distribution here for different video anatomy detection data, basically. So we have 2 clients here and 2 clients here. So in total, we have 4 clients. And instead of collecting data, because we cannot, because in the UK, we don't have access to the Indian data. And similarly, in India, we don't have access to the UK data. So to establish models beyond borders, what we are trying to do is we are trying to take help of federated learning framework to solve a problem. And the problem, like I said, is anatomy detection problem. So we have, let's say, a few anatomies here, like the fetal head, abdomen, heart, stomach bubble, cerebellum, etc. And our task is to detect these different anatomies, right? And now the problem we encounter is the problem of class imbalance, which is oftentimes encountered in medical image analysis because of the rarity of some anatomies, some diseases, etc. So in these cases that we had, we found that in the videos or on different frames, the head, abdomen, and heart were quite dominant. They were quite available, whereas the stomach bubble and cerebellum were very fine-grained structures. It's basically substructures. Stomach bubble is a substructure inside the abdomen, and cerebellum is a small substructure inside the head, as you can see here. This is the stomach bubble, and this is the cerebellum. And so it's increasingly rare. As you can see, the imbalance ratio is quite high. And not just that, the imbalance ratio varies from client to client. So in the Indian sites versus the UK sites, the class distribution of these different classes are varying. And so as you can see, if we just use a normal a normal machine learning model to detect or classify these different anatomies, the GradCam shows that it's not really working. So that's why we come up with our proposal or our proposed method, where we try to solve this from a client scenario. So we have, let's say, 4 clients here, Indian clients and the UK clients. And so in each client, we compute something called a difficulty metric. So we try to compute the difficulty of the task based on the given class distribution. So based on the given classes of the labels, we try to compute class distribution or the label distribution, and we use this class distribution to define this difficulty metric and use it to guide a loss function called focal loss. So focal loss is quite popular in class imbalance problems, to tackle class imbalance problems. And what we do is we use the difficulty metric to guide our focal loss. And that's why we call it client-aware focal loss. And as a result of that, you can see we are able to mitigate the problem of class imbalance across different clients. And as you can see, the model focuses more on the areas that it's supposed to focus on, like the cerebellum and the stomach bubble. And this is done by balancing the gradients of the majority and the minority classes using this client-aware focal loss, which is again guided by this difficulty metric. Now, the other problem we had was this communication gap. So oftentimes what we figure is, because we have to do it iteratively, we have to collect the models in the server and then again send it back. So there involves lots of rounds of communications between the clients and server, and oftentimes there are stragglers, there's lag in communication, etc. So that's why we try to deal with something called one-shot federated learning. So this is our project between the UK sites and an Australian hospital, where we are trying to detect congenital heart diseases in fetal ultrasound video. So we have a few hospitals here, as you can see, I've listed here, and we are taking the first three sites, for example, site 1, 2, and 3, where we have data from different hospitals in UK and in London and in Australia. And as you can see, there's a little bit of domain shift or domain gap across these different clients. So as a result of that, we want to work on federated learning while mitigating the domain gaps. But the main problem we are facing here is that during training time, we have all normal samples because we are trying to eventually detect congenital heart disease. But we are saying that during training time, we have all normal samples, whereas during test time, we have a mixture of normal and abnormal samples. And based on what we train with normal samples during our training time, we are trying to detect abnormal samples or normal samples during test time, right? So that problem is also called normality prediction. That's what we are trying to do, but in a one-shot federated learning approach. I can see a raised hand. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to accept questions now, or should we keep it for the end?
That's up to you, Pramit. But I was going to say, if you have a question, please enter it into the Q&A, and then we can answer it that way.
Yeah, I think that'll be better. Yeah, thank you. Let's do that. So moving on. So what we are trying to do is we are trying to train in a federated learning fashion, but one shot, which means that we will not do back and forth communication. We'll keep training the models locally. And after the models are entirely trained locally in these different clients, now we'll merge the models one time instead of doing round after round of communication, right? So that's what we come up with. We propose something called the model merging technique, where we compute, let's say we have three individual models, M1, M2, and M3, that were individually trained in these different sites. We first compute something called a geometric median to get an aggregation of these different models. And then we subtract the geometric median from these individually trained models to compute what we call a divergence vector, which shows how far are my individual models apart from a central model or a global model. And so we use this vector magnitude to weight individual models for aggregation. So eventually we aggregate. So we say M1 plus M2 plus M3, but we do a weighted aggregation where we weight it based on a distance function, a distance-based matrix defined based on the magnitude of the divergence vectors. The other thing that we do is we often see there are lots of noisy models or outliers. So to tackle that kind of scenario, noisy updates, what we do is we check how far my individual models are. So M1, M2, and M3 are with respect to this M star. We go on a parameter level, we check every parameter or every weights and bias of the model and see if the magnitude of weights and the biases are higher than the divergence vector, then we keep it. If the magnitudes are not higher, then we say, oh, it's probably just a noisy update and it's not that important parameter. We replace the parameter by the corresponding parameter of this geometric median model. By the way, for each of these works, wherever a publicly available paper is available, for example, this one is available, the manuscript is available, I have added a QR code so that if you want to know more about this work, you can always go and check out the paper associated with this QR code. So I'll have these in different slides as I go on. Now, a little bit of performance analysis of this method. So we do different experiments. First of all, we have a centralized scenario where, let's say, if we could combine all the data together and train our model on this, what would the performance be like? And then what if we didn't have this federated learning setup? So we could only train local models in local clients. So model 1, 2, and 3 individually, how much performance do they achieve versus how much can we achieve via this one-shot federated learning or model merging approach. So what you'll see most of the cases is that in the centralized approach, and particularly in the model 1 as well, you'll see that it detects almost all the test samples as normal samples, and it says, oh, we don't have any abnormal samples at all. So that's a problem. Whereas in our settings, you'll see we have a very balanced scenario where we can detect normal and abnormal samples during test time. even though the models were only trained on normal samples during training time. Okay, now moving on to a new direction, which is the direction of unlabeled or semi-supervised learning. So let's say we have some scenarios where we are collaborating with institutions that don't have labeled data. Oftentimes in healthcare, we find that annotations are quite expensive, quite time-consuming, and oftentimes many hospitals or many institutions do not have their data annotated. So now the question we are asking is, how can we solve this practical problem with federated learning setting where we are collaborating with institutions, some of which have labeled data, some of which don't have labeled data? So let's say I have a labeled client L1 and I have 3 unlabeled clients U1, U2, and U3, and S is my server, right? So now the question is, how can we train this supervised and unsupervised models at the same time? So for example, we have a client here, for example, we have a supervised client. That's where we train using cross-entropy laws. And in the semi-supervised or unsupervised client, basically, we train using the standard format of consistency regularization laws using a student-teacher model, right? And as the models are trained with different loss functions in different clients, the models get diverged away from each other. And that's the problem we are trying to tackle. We propose a relatively straightforward solution where we say, how about we aggregate the models coming from different clients based on the availability of labels. In other words, how about we just group together the clients that don't have labels, and we combine the models coming from there. And after the models are aggregated in the server, we send the models back to the label clients, where we update the models based on label clients, bring it back to server, then send it to the unlabeled clients, and so on. So we go from back and forth between the labeled and unlabeled clients, right? But the problem that ends up happening is that because the models are now learning very different information across different clients because of the loss function of the objective function, the models oscillate. So to stop the oscillation, we propose one extra step, which is the self-supervised pre-training of one round in every client before the actual training starts. So we will do supervised learning in the labeled clients, we'll do unsupervised learning in the labeled clients, and we will oscillate between these two clients using a switching. But what we'll do is, before we train the models on our data, on our loss function, we add one extra step of self-supervised pre-training using an information maximization loss. That is, we are trying to understand the local data distribution before actually working on the loss optimization, so that it helps us to reduce the oscillation. And what we saw is that this really helped us to get better performance with respect to our baseline methods. Now, one assumption we had here is that the data distribution across different clients are more or less balanced. But if we have extreme imbalance scenarios, like we were looking at in the previous situation, for example, we have class imbalance and lots of data heterogeneity across different clients, how do we deal with this kind of scenario? So we extended this work into a scenario where we have extreme imbalances and data heterogeneity and missing classes. So for example, let's say we have 10 clients. In the x-axis, you can see there are 10 client indices, and these are class indices. And the size of the circles determine the amount of data corresponding to that class present. So you can see different classes are absent in different clients. And we are saying, how about we have one labeled client here and all these other clients are unlabeled. So we try to come up with methods to solve this kind of problems. We proposed 3 different solution pathways for this. The first one is we incorporate something called an interclass proximity factor in both the labeled and unlabeled clients. So we basically block the gradients from the classes that are not present in a given client, and we ensure that the influence of the minority classes are magnified. So we sort of balance the gradient influence of the majority and minority classes using this interclass proximity factor. Second, we add a new teacher model here. If you remember, last time we had a student-teacher model, and we figured that during the beginning of the training, the teacher model really struggles, and so it cannot teach the student model because the teacher model is not strong enough. That's why we add a new teacher model, which is a foundation model. We use Dino V2 as a foundation model to sort of guide us through the initial pathway, through the initial process to guide my student model. And the third contribution that we have here is we add a new type of aggregation. It's not just a model aggregation. We add something called a prototype aggregation. Prototypes are centroids of different classes. So we compute centroids of different classes in different clients, and we aggregate the centroid of different classes, and we find the global aggregate or the global prototype, which we send to the unlabeled client to debias the classifier, because the classifier of a model is mostly biased towards class imbalance scenarios and heterogeneity. So we try to debias that using this prototype aggregation. And as a result, what we see is that our proposed method, which is shown in blue curve, performs way better. It has reduced oscillation as well as it's more stable, and the convergence is better with respect to our baseline, which was called RSC-FET. Moving on to a different direction of federated learning, where we say, what if we were training our models on different data sets? So we have, let's say, different skin cancer data sets here. Two skin cancer data sets where we cannot communicate between each other. There's no data transfer available, but we want to build personalized models for each individual client. And we want to take help of each other to build better models. Okay. Now, what if we have already built our models and now a new client wants to join our federation? How do we use these individual models in working with our new client? So let's say this new client joins in. What we try to do is we try to align these already trained models to our new client. Instead of training a new model from scratch, we try to take help of these two personalized models that were trained using federated learning to align. And for that, you can find the paper if you're interested. I'll just give you the brief idea about how do we deal with it. We look at the gradients. We look at the gradient updates of these two individual clients, and we try to interleave the gradients. We try to mix the gradients, and we try to get a mixture of these two different models using gradient alignment on this target domain. So this problem is basically the federated learning extension of test time adaptation, where we have a new client during test time, and we don't want to retrain the model from scratch. And as a result, using this method, we showed that our method achieves better performance. We name our method star align, and we find that our method achieves better performance than the baseline methods. Now, this is when one client joins in. What happens if clients keep joining and we have to keep learning from the new clients? So this is the setting of continual federated learning that we worked on last year, where we say, okay, we had a model that we built based on two clients, and now a new client joins in. And then we make a model, we build a model, and then a new client joins in again, client D here. How do we keep learning from the new clients while preserving the information that we have already learned from the previous clients? So for example, let's look at this setting where we are trying to tackle a segmentation problem based on abdominal CT datasets, where we had two clients initially. One client was expert in pancreas segmentation, and the other client is expert in spleen segmentation, right? Because they have data and labels corresponding to those anatomies. And so we have now a model that can do both segmentation. Now, a new client joins in. This new client, KITS, has expertise in kidney segmentation. So you can see there are kidney segmentations done here. So now we are trying to learn this new skill or this new information from this new client while preserving the information that we learned from client 1 and 2. So now we should be able to segment kidney as well as we should be able to preserve the information that we learned by segmenting spleen and pancreas. Let's say a new client joins in our federation, which is expert in liver diseases. So they do liver segmentation here. So now I should be able to preserve the segmentation of the other anatomies as well as learn the new anatomies and so on and so forth. So clients keep joining, and we have to keep updating ourselves with the new clients while making sure that we don't forget the information learned from the previous clients. The main idea that we have here, again, I have the QR code here if you want to learn more about this task. But the main idea that we're looking at is we use something called knowledge distillation in the server. In the server, we have an extra data set. We utilize an extra data set that is none of these data sets, but we acquire a new data set. And it doesn't need to be labeled. It can be just an unlabeled data set. And we are trying to do knowledge distillation where we say these 4 models are our teacher models, and these models are frozen models. That is, these 4 client models that were trained individually are our frozen models, and we learn a new model based on these models, these frozen models. And this new learned model has information about all this. And so as models keep coming up, our teacher models increase. So we add another teacher model and learn. So that's how we keep preserving the information of the past while adding new models that know new information about new segmentation tasks. We move towards something called multimodal federated learning, where we have multiple modalities. So we have something, we have MRI modalities here, and some of you might know MRI has different modalities like T1 MRI, T2 MRI, FLAIR MRI, diffusion MRI, and so on and so forth. What we want to do is, we know that different institutions and different clients, different hospitals use different combinations of MRIs or different types of MRIs to detect different pathologies. So if I'm looking at a tumor detection in a particular area of brain, let's say, they'll prescribe some particular types of MRI. Whereas if they want to look at stroke lesions or some other pathologies, they will prescribe some other MRI. So what we want to do is, instead of individually training models in different clients, we want to build a federated learning model where we can collaborate with these different institutions that prescribe different types of MRIs or different types of tumor segmentation tasks or stroke segmentation tasks, etc. And we want to build a unified model across these different clients. So we want to train our model across different clients that have different types of inputs and also different types of tasks. So you can think of this as a foundation or as a basic idea behind building federated foundation models, right? So the straightforward approach that we use here is that during training, we use a technique called random modality drop. So we randomly drop a few modalities during training to make the model robust against different input modalities and different tasks. So we train using normal segmentation models like UNet model here, and we train using dice loss and cross-entropy loss. But what we do is to make sure that during test time, if I have new modalities coming up, which is an unseen modality combination. So previously we hadn't seen T1, T2 modality combination. But if we have this T1, T2, that is unseen MRI modalities coming up, and we are given a new task, then we can generalize. Our model should be able to generalize to these new modality combinations. So that's why we want to disentangle the modality combinations by doing random modality drops. So we randomly drop a few modalities during training to make it more robust. And as you can see here, we have these 5 different clients having 5 different data sets here. So these are different types of pathologies like stroke lesion segmentation, tumor segmentation, sclerosis segmentation, injury segmentation, hyperintensity segmentation, and so on and so forth. We have the ground truth here that shows the segmentation masks. If we were to do single center, that is, if we didn't have this federated learning collaboration, how well could we build models here? Versus with our FedUni brain, which is a federated learning unified brain segmentation model, we see that our segmentation performs better than single center. So in some cases where even the single center struggles, we are able to perform better, and we are able to detect some anatomies or pathologies where the single center models cannot detect because of the absence of abundant amount of data, which we do have access via federated learning, right? Because we are collaborating with different institutions, and this adds to more data. The advantage is particularly noticed in external data sets, where we have, let's say, IELTS and Tumor 2 data set, and you can see the ground truth looks like this, and our FedUni brain gives a very good segmentation performance as well, whereas individual models trained on the same type of task, that is stroke lesion task, were not performing that well. So this shows the impact of doing federated learning. Moving on to a different type of multimodal federated learning. Previously, we were looking at all images, multimodal, but all images. Now we're looking towards language vision models. So where we have, let's say, some clients that have single modalities, whereas some clients that have double modalities. So we have chest X-ray images and associated radiological reports in some clients, whereas in some other clients, we just have chest X-ray without any report, which is fair because in resource constrained settings or in rural areas or in less resource settings, we don't often have the advantage of having a radiologist and having reports associated with it. So how can we build models that looks at different information at different clients is the question we were asking. Because if you have both chest X-ray image and reports in some clients, whereas you have only chest X-rays in some other clients, the model looks at, or the model learns from only images in these clients where reports are not available, whereas it mostly learns from reports when both chest X-ray and reports are available, because reports are sort of a shortcut learning path for the model, because the reports have more information than the chest X-rays in terms of the disease detection task. So we are solving a chest X-ray disease detection under the multimodal federated learning with missing modalities, right? Again, I have the link to the paper if you're interested. This was published this year in AAAI. If you're interested, you can go and check out the paper for more details. We try a few pathways to tackle the problem. First of all, we are working with a transformer, a multimodal transformer, which has self-attention blocks. And so first of all, we try to manipulate the self-attention masks because we are working with image, I, and T text. And because we want to look at the interaction between the image and text, we want to manipulate the interaction here, seeing what if I block the interaction between text and image? What if I allow some interaction? What if I allow some partial interaction versus complete interaction between text and image? Because the main idea is to constrain the model to look at the modality I want it to look at. The next method that we tried, the next solution pathway, is a very straightforward pathway where we say, when there is no report, generate a report. Use a machine learning model, use a third-party model, let's say, which ideally is pre-trained on some data. You can fine-tune the model on the client where you have both image and text so that it knows how to generate text given an image, and just use it as inference during these clients where you don't have reports. So you generate the reports based on a third-party model. So that's what we tried. We called it modality imputation technique, and that seemed to work the best. But it has its own caveats. For example, if there's too much gap in data distribution or there's domain gap associated with it or new diseases coming up, then the model doesn't work very well. The other methods we looked at is we tried to constrain the models. We said, you're learning different information in different clients, and that's why you are drifting away from each other. But what if we could constrain the client models so that they don't move away much from each other? So we tried to add a regularization. We tried to regularize the models in the weight space or the parameter space, where we say, hey, I want to make sure that the models don't diverge away from each other. That is, the parameters don't diverge away from each other. The parameters remain closer to each other in different clients. We try to do it in the embedding space, where we use contrastive learning and say the multimodal model M and the unimodal model U must be close to each other in different clients. And we try the same regularization technique in the logic space, where we say the output coming from the multimodal models versus the output coming from the unimodal models must be very similar. So we try to regularize in these three spaces, either parameter space or embedding space or logic space. The other technique we tried is we said, what if we had some data on server? Could we utilize some data coming from a different distribution in the server, and we don't even need labels for it? Can we utilize some data on the server to bring these models closer to each other and mitigate this modality heterogeneity or missing modality problem? So that's what we did. We tried to get the embeddings of different models, multimodal and unimodal models, and we maximize the cosine similarity across these different clients to make sure that the client embeddings are very similar. Or we also tried this on a KL divergence loss using the ensemble, that is in the logit space. We get the logits from each individual clients, and we try to learn a student model that sort of builds a consensus among these different multimodal and unimodal clients so that we can learn from all these clients without having this problem of gap across different modalities. Moving on to my last direction of today's discussion, where we looked at the federated learning setup with foundation models. One of the main problems we face these days is the fine-tuning of foundation models takes huge compute. So, and as you can see here, I have the QR code as well. So if you want to know more about the work, this is published this year in AAA as well. So you can go and check it out. What we try to do is we try to work on vision language models. And we try to fine-tune vision language models in a parameter efficient way. So there are different parameter efficient fine-tuning techniques that are available to us. That is PEFT for fine-tuning only parts of neural network or adding new fine-tunable parameters to the neural network while keeping the original parameters fixed. And so if we first of all build a benchmark across different clients. So the clients we have, let me explain the task that we have here. So we have different VQA datasets as different VQA clients. And these are modality-specific clients. So all these boxes that you see are different clients. And each client is a modality-specific client. So in one clinic, for example, we have a CT clinic. Another clinic is an ultrasound clinic, and so on and so forth. And we want to build one model, like I said earlier as well. We want to build one global model that can identify diseases or that can answer questions based on these different modalities in different clients that have different questions, different types of diseases, different anatomies, and of course, different modalities. So these are very different information across different clients. The main problem that we figured is that because we are trying to learn the very different information across different clients, and this problem is called the problem of task heterogeneity, because the tasks are very different and varying from client to client. It leads to lots of oscillations in the training curve. As you can see, the training curve, the loss curve has so much oscillations here because we are learning very different information and different clients, and the training is not stable. So that's why what we try to do is we try to align the adapters. We look at adapter-based fine-tuning, and we try to align the adapters or the models before merging or before aggregation. So every time we train the models locally in these individual clients, before merging or before aggregation of the models, we try to align the models together. For example, let's say we have these two models in the loss landscape, as you can see, in the low loss landscape. We have two models, and if we average the models, the average or the aggregated model will lie somewhere here, which is a high loss landscape, and we don't want that model because that leads to scenarios like this. So what we do is we permute the model. We use this optimal transport theory where we permute or shuffle the adapter parameters so that we can align the adapters to each other. That is, we try to align the models of different clients to each other and then aggregate. The main idea or the main theme of this paper is align before merge. Before you aggregate the models, if the models are not aligned together, then you'll see instability in training. But if you can add another extra step of aligning the models before training, that helps a lot. So we did two types of alignment. We have a server, we have a client, and we send the client models to the server. We first aggregate the client models and get a global model, and then we adapt individual models to this global model by doing this alignment or this permutation. I'll not go into much details about it, but you can find more details if you're interested in the paper. And also, as a result of this kind of alignment, we see that the oscillations or the instability of the training process reduced substantially. What I also figured out is the last work I'm going to talk about. It was accepted as a CVPR highlight this year. What we also figured out is if we are dealing with very large models, like let's say a lava model, which has 32 transformer layers, it's not possible for us to train or fine tune each individual layers or even each individual adapters, for a matter of fact. So that's why we try to do a selective fine tuning. In other words, the question we are asking is, in a federated learning setup, if we have to select different layers in different clients to fine tune, how can we select the layers? How can we select different layers for fine-tuning in different clients? And how can we establish a consensus between how we select layers across different clients for fine-tuning the foundation models. So that's why we come up with this idea of client-level layer importance, first of all. So we use the idea of neural tangent kernel. There's this concept of neural tangent kernel, which tells us about the training dynamics of neural networks. And we use the eigenvalues of that neural tangent kernel for each individual layers to see which layers are more important to us on a local level. And we see what the layer distribution looks like. So we have the distribution of importance of different layers across different clients, for example, across different rounds as well. And then we see it's sort of very monotonic in a sense that we oftentimes see different clients preferring very similar layers. And so we end up learning only 4 or 5 layers across different clients. But we need to diversify a little bit. We add some theoretical foundation to it where we say, if we can diversify the selection of layers across different clients, we can improve the performance, because then we are adding information from different layers, and different layers look at different levels of information. So that's why we add another component in the server side, where we say we not only want to use the client level layer importance, but we also want to use a concept of layer diversity. We want to encourage the clients to select diverse layers, not the same layers across all the clients. And so we combine these two factors, one factor being the client level layer importance and the other being the layer diversity, to optimize using something called a meta-heuristic optimization procedure. And as a result, you can see we diversify the layer selection across different clients and across different rounds as well. And that leads to a better performance in terms of segregation of different classes or different answers as well. I just wanted to show you what it looks like. So for example, in different clients here, you can see the eigenvalue of neural tangent kernels, and based on these metrics, we can figure out which layers to go for. So you have 32 layers for Lava in each different clients, and we can select the layers which are more important. And yeah, so that's what we do. We select those clients based on individual importance, and we fine tune only those layers, right? And then, yeah, that's what it looks like. I showed it. And then we add this extra step in the server where we combine, or we dual optimize these two factors. One factor being the layer importance, that is the client level score, and also we add the layer diversity. And we jointly optimize these two factors. As a result, we see that we are able to add some new layers in our fine-tuning setting, which previously was more monotonic. So only a few layers were preferred, whereas now we have added some new layers for fine-tuning. And as a result, we can see some diversity, and that leads to some better performance in terms of the embedding space, and it shows better performance for VQA or vision language problem solving in federated learning setting. That's it from my side. I talked about what federated learning is and how can it enable international collaborations in real-world federated learning settings, and what are the main challenges that we face with federated learning, including problems with the class imbalance, data heterogeneity across clients, domain shifts, absence of labels across different clients. What if a new client joins in after I have done federated learning? What if different clients keep joining after one after another, and we have to preserve the information while learning new information? What happens if we have missing modalities across different multimodal clients? What if we have varying modalities like the MRI study that we showed? And what if we have heterogeneity in terms of resources? That is, some clients have higher resource, some clients have lower compute or resources, and then accordingly we have to select what layers or what parameters we can train. How can we deal with that in a federated learning setup and still try to achieve the best of both worlds? That's it from my side. Thank you so much. These are the papers that I talked about that came from our biomedical image analysis cluster in Oxford. If you're interested, take a screenshot and you can follow up later. And that's it. Thank you. Feel free to connect with me, and I'm happy to do collaborations if anyone is interested in this space.
Thank you, Pramit. If anybody has a question, please enter it in the Q&A. We do have 2 questions so far. Dr. Azer Iqbal has asked, for congenital heart disease, how can you test the model?
Thanks for the question. So because for the test set, we have like fetal cardiologists who are looking at this, who are basically specialists. So they can give us the labels corresponding to that. So we have for our test set labels for the normal and abnormal herds. And so based on that, we can just verify how well our model is performing.
Okay.
Hopefully that kind of answers.
Next question is, what metrics were taken into consideration to train the data, and were those matrices, were they validated somehow? Sometimes matrices might or might not create biasness during model training.
So, for example, we have some standard metrics, or I think okay. So we have standard metrics to look at training and validation. For example, if you're looking at loss function level, if it's classification, we look at entropy-based loss as a metric. Whereas if you're looking at measurement of your performance, then you look at like AUC metrics, balanced accuracy metrics, recall precision, F1 score, and things like that. If you're looking at segmentation, you look at union over intersection, dice coefficient, etc., etc. And yeah, so these are the two main types of works we tackled anyway. So segmentation and classification. So we just use the standard metrics for that. What multi-objective meta-heuristics did you consider? The next question is about the multi-objective meta-heuristic. We considered a total of 5 meta-heuristic algorithms. We looked at genetic algorithm, we looked at swarm particle optimization, simulated annealing, and 2 others. Can't remember which ones those were, but we had sort of like a benchmarking of different multi-objective meta-heuristic optimization settings. But you can follow up from the paper as well.
Okay. If there are no other questions, we can conclude our session today. If anybody else has a question, please enter it now. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Pramit, for your presentation, and thank you everybody for joining the RISE-MICCAI journal session today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Have a good one. Bye-bye.